All right, we're back with my friend Jake Gorsica and his coin collection. Today he's going to walk us through some of the coins that he has that relate to the early church period. And so some of the coins include coins minted in Amphipolis and Philippi. And what this really helps us to do is to see that the biblical references that we have were truly historical, and they had a life of their own. And so these are the cities that we're talking about. So Jake, let's just go through them one by one, talk a little bit about the city, and tell us about the coin we're picturing. So we'll start with Amphipolis.
All right. Amphipolis was once a very powerful Greek city. It was founded in 437 BC by a group of Athenians who were trying to get a stronghold in Thrace. Now, this kind of fell from grace by Paul's time. It was conquered by the Romans in 168 BC. The city had a little bit of freedom, but it was really not the powerhouse that it had once been. Now, Scripture tells us that Paul and Silas passed through this city on their way to Philippi and to other points further west. It doesn't tell us very much else about it. Now, this specific coin predates Paul by a good 100 years at least. It was issued between 185 and 168 BC, when it was still a free Greek territory. On the front, we can see Zeus. On the back is a club, which was a very common design in northern Greece. And we can see a little bit of the original inscription that just says, "of Amphipolis." All right, now this coin is from Thessalonica. This is a very well-known biblical city. 2 of Paul's letters went to a church in this city. It was a very rich Greek metropolis. It was along ancient trade routes, and that made it one of the most important cities in all of Macedonia. The city was originally called Therma, but when one of Alexander the Great's successors, Cassander, took over, he renamed it for his wife, whose name was Thessaloniki. Thessalonica also fell to the Romans in 168 BC, excuse me. That was when the Romans just swept through all of Greece. Just about every city fell in that year. This coin, however, is from a much later time period. It was minted during the Roman period. The city still had permission to mint some of its own coins. Unfortunately, this one was struck on a flan that was way too small. On the left picture, you can see the back end of 2 centaurs. The coin originally would have had the entire body of each centaur, but there just wasn't enough metal when they struck it. We see the same problem on the front. Over here on the right is supposed to be the double-faced god Janus. Again, you can only see part of that design. It's almost unintelligible in this little piece. Okay, Philippi is another very important city in the scriptures. Paul passed through there. He and Silas both did. It was, at this point, a Roman colony. Now, what a Roman colony is the Romans would take an existing city and they would move a large number of their population there to try to Romanize it. Philippi was also an important city to the Romans. When Antony and Augustus teamed up to avenge Julius Caesar's death, they chased Brutus and Cassius all the way to Philippi and finally crushed them there. This coin is a commemorative issue trying to celebrate Augustus's victory. On the front of the coin, which you can see in the left picture, we have an image of the goddess Nike, who is the goddess of victory. And we can see a little bit of an inscription that says, "The Victory of Augustus." On the back, we can see the name of Philippi. We can also see some royal military standards. Now, Philippi was one of Paul's greatest successes. If you read the book of Philippians, it's a very positive, very upbeat book, which means Paul knew that he had done at least one thing right. Now, Troas, this name actually refers to a region. There's a small peninsula in Asia Minor, and that was called the region of Troas, or Troad. The city that this coin comes from is actually called Alexandria Troas. It was named that by King Lysimachus, who was one of Alexander the Great's successors. He named it in honor of Alexander. This coin is from a much later period. It actually dates to the middle of the 3rd century AD, but I've included it here just to give a little bit of a reference to the city of Troas, which you see again and again and again in the New Testament. This is the city where Paul was staying when he received the dream about a Macedonian asking him to come over to Greece and share the gospel there. This coin is one of the most important turning points in the history of the church in that sense. All right, city of Pergamum, or Pergamon in its Greek name. This one was not actually mentioned in Acts, but it is mentioned in the New Testament, the book of Revelation. Revelation calls the city the place where Satan has his throne. Not where I would want to live, but this first coin you see here is from around 200 to 133 BC. The reason we can get such a specific year is we know that 133 BC was the last year that this city was independent. The last king, Attalus III, left the city, the kingdom, and all of its wealth to the Roman Republic in his will. He was so afraid that war would come after his death, and he didn't want his people to have to deal with a war, to be slaughtered in droves, as the Romans were famous for doing. He simply left the city to them. We've got another coin from Pergamon here. This one has a picture of the god of healing, whose name I cannot pronounce to save my life. You'll have to look him up. You can see him on the front, on the left. On the back is his staff entwined with snakes, which is the symbol of healing. This little coin right here, it's a very tiny bronze coin from the city of Corinth. Anyone who's studied the New Testament has come across Corinth. Paul spent a lot of time here. He wrote 2 letters to this church, and they're some of the least positive letters in all of the New Testament. Corinth was a very wicked city. It was also a very wealthy city and in a very important city. In the Greek period, it was one of the most important cities in all of Greece. Corinth fell to the Romans in 146 BC. They completely destroyed it and then built a new city on its ashes, which means that when Paul was going through Corinth, none of the buildings were original. This coin is from a much earlier period. It dates from the 4th century BC. On here we can see a trident. On the front of the coin, which is so worn you can't see it, we know there would be an image of Pegasus. Pegasus was the symbol of strength to the Greeks, and the Corinthians probably chose that just to flaunt their position as an important and powerful city in Greece.
All right, thanks. That's our tour of early church coins. Appreciate all your collection. I'd invite our viewers to check out the YouTube channel, Basin and Towel, and you can find all of our discussions on coins. So thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll be back with more.